Hi all, I have another very exciting game to show you from TCEC, Season 17, the Premier Division. So this is round 9. It's the opening book given. The first 8 moves are all the opening book given to the engines. And we have the Reti opening, so Stockfish playing white, plays knight f3. We see knight f6, knight c3, c5. So this gives it a Sicilian defence transposition. In fact, this position has been seen quite a lot before, in theory. g6. For those curious, I was, knight d4, the line goes e5. You don't mind apparently giving up the light square bishop. And the idea is knight g5, it seems here. So that means queen f3 is quite effectual here. Yeah, it's an interesting line. So queen f3, for example, like this. And black could go wrong disastrously like that. But otherwise it's kind of equalish after e takes, and it's about equal. It's a positional line, so we're transposing the positional sort of Rosalimo style territory. Let's go back. So we have g6, not knight d4, e5, knight g4, bishop takes c6. So what is this opening all about? What are the imbalances here to explore? White has given up that light square bishop. As we know from a lot of neural network games, often it's the other color complex which is reinforced after that. And that makes sense statistically, because that knight could have been used on both dark squares and light squares potentially. Knights are versatile. But can white now establish more of a grip on the dark squares here? That e5 is a kind of Nimzovickian pawn to overprotect. So we have h3 though, driving the knight to h6, d3. There is the possibility of this knight coming to f5, but in the book given to the engines, there's bishop g7 actually. Now knight e4 is played, hitting c5, not giving black any time to castle. c5, or does it? c5, there's queen a5 check. But black does actually protect the pawn. I think there's no penalty if black castles here. Let's have a look. Knight takes check would be a silly thing to do. But black protects the pawn anyway, as if that was a threat, which I don't think it is. a4, and as if the threat is a5, which I'm not sure it is, black played a5. You might wonder, well, is a positional threat from white a5? Not necessarily. I've checked this out. This position doesn't seem that bad for black. Black's got plans like to get this knight into d4 and should be about equal here. It's no big deal. But anyway, this was prompted, a5 was prompted. It does give that a7 square. Sometimes you see in games that rook using a7, sometimes coming over to the king side, sometimes even later. Knight g3, so this does seem to discourage knight f5. If white plays castling instead, knight f5, then this should be an interesting position. It should be reasonably interesting. You might wonder, what the heck was that about? Well, if e takes, then e takes is nice, winning that dark square bishop. But say black did have to do this effort to manually put the king over into safety, it should still be okay. Black's got a nice looking position. So knight g3 anyway, bishop e6. We have queen e2, bishop d5. So black is volunteering to get rid of the light square bishop. And you could argue, well, to fight more on the dark squares as well, getting rid of that piece. So both sides are kind of light square. They're not really caring about light square pressure here. So bishop takes f3. It's sort of deemed a problem piece, that light square bishop. Queen takes f3, queen d5. Now queen e2. There's always the idea of that bishop takes h6. So any queen e5, queen takes, and then bishop takes h6. So that pawn's immune. Bishop f4. It is reinforced anyway. e6. Now this encourages white, it seems, to perch the knight on e4. This e6 move. If rook a d8, rook a e1. Knight f5 here, white should have a small edge in this line, so that's fine as well. Okay, so e6, we have knight e4, knight f5. Now Stockfish really makes a statement about chess with this next move, kind of. Well, you can say that about many Stockfish moves. And it's the same statement Grandmaster Bruiser Nakobian made to me once on my trip to Gibraltar. I once played in Gibraltar. I was asking Bruiser, what do you think of Nimzovich mind system? What are the fundamentals of chess? And he said it really all depends on the position. And Stockfish is really saying that on some of its moves, because this next move is a bit of a rule breaker move. And if you look at Stockfish games, it really does quite often say, look, I'm playing this move in this position. I don't care what the general rules are. And it's moving pawns around the king. Guess what Stockfish plays in this position? You might find it a little bit surprising. Or not. You might think it's totally justified as well. Okay, 5 seconds to pause the video. White to play. Okay. G4, yes. In principle, this often backfires. If we mere mortals move pawns around the king, often it's going to be more painful than not. Well, at least for me anyway. So G4, though, it seems pretty justifiable here in this particular configuration of the position. So knight D4 was played. One question you might immediately ask, this bishop's a loose piece. What about this tactic? Bishop takes E5. It turns out here, the pin is resolved with knight c3. The knight protects the queen, so that is going to be winning a piece. Bishop takes e5 is not working here. Yep, so that's just winning a piece cleanly. And if on knight e7 there's knight f6 check, this installing that form pawn, it turns out here white dominates the position by breaking open the d file. It's quite fascinating, I thought. Taking that d file and just hammering the dark squares. White really dominates the dark squares as well as the d file there. So yeah, it seems really justifiable in this position. So Stockfish saying it really does all depend on the position. So knight d4, even encouraging this tempo move, is centralizing tempo move. And another kind of odd looking move, queen d1. Is this an aggressive retreat, passive aggression or something? Queen d1. It kind of is. It's keeping hold of f3. There are threats of both c3 and c4 sometimes. And also this pawn is still immune because of that c4 in particular, that tempo gainer. The tempo gainers on the queen in general, we need to keep an eye on them. So black plays c4, suppressing that tempo gainer move. Just to put bishop takes e5 on the board, c4. What does black do? It's a disaster. Just lose the bishop. And if rook a d8 here, it turns out bishop g5, and this position is nice for white. So, for example, bishop takes e5, we're back to c4, and that actually traps the queen. And if, say, rook a7, c3, and then c4 is kind of winning because we've just won the knight. And if queen takes, there's knight f6 actually winning the queen instead, which is even stronger first. So, yeah, it's all pretty tricky after queen d1. That's another delicate little move here, tailored to this position. c4, we have rook e1, b5. Here, if bishop takes e5, d takes c4 is the big snag, and the bishop is dropping off on whatever queen moves, or queen takes c4, bishop takes e5. And if so c takes d3 here, there's queen takes, and that's a big problem as well. For example, this position is very nice for white. White's getting a big edge here. So anyway, rook e1, b5, bishop g5, we have c takes d. So interesting position here. You might think, hang on, what about this pawn here? Again, if queen takes e5, there's knight f6 check, always winning that queen. And if bishop takes e5, there's a strong move in bishop f6. And the dark squares are a disaster here. For example, rook fb8, d takes, b takes. F4 is an absolute killer move. Absolute killer. Winning material or going to fault the queen and king. So if here, then just take that. Otherwise, it's just winning material. If bishop takes, it's just going to take this knight. So yeah, it's all fun and games there. So c takes d3. White has to tread carefully here. White plays correctly queen d3, it seems, very, very correctly. Structurally, you might think this is suspect. It's actually more than just suspect. If you take with the pawn here, black gets a fantastic position like this, with that b file. The knight's really nicely perched on d4 without being interrupted, and can cause chaos like this. That's just a big position for black, big advantage. So queen takes d3, absolutely necessary. Queen c4, and we have again a really interesting technical move, queen d1. So what about this c2 pawn? It's immune. If b takes a4 is played, if knight takes, it just simply runs into this pin, and that's just, yeah. And if queen takes c4, we just take the knight. So yeah, so b takes a4, bishop e7. We have rook b8. I was curious here myself if rook fe8 had been played. What does white do? Probably one of the better moves is bishop f6, just holding control over the position. And for example, like this, there's a fascinating line here, so I just want to show you this. Knight takes, there's knight d6 hitting f7 and c4. That's absolutely winning. Otherwise it's going to be mating queen f7, queen g7. And if rook f8 instead, though, black's greed to take these pawns is actually, it seems justified here. Rook ad1, knight c5. It seems as though black can get away with this position. This is quite nasty looking, but black, apparently, it seems even technically. So yeah, white has to be careful about this position going south, it seems. So rook fb8. Anyway, rook e8 wasn't tested. We see rook a3. That looks pretty nifty. So ideas of rook d3 and it covers f3. c5. If rook takes b2, rook c3, queen d5, rook d3, and you see that bishop takes c5, that knight's loose on d4. So yeah, this nifty rook move, this rook a3, is quite interesting. And let's have a look at this again. In here, instead of bishop takes, so instead of c5, if bishop takes e5, then knight c3, and this is just winning material. It's just going to be winning material. This ending is not good enough for black. So yeah, that's too much pressure, and there's ideas like rook takes and rook takes d4 sometimes as well. But basically, yeah, that's going to be winning material. So rook a3, c5. We have rook c3, queen b5, bishop takes c5, knight c6, knight f6, and white is establishing a strong dart square grip here off the queen f3. So holding that knight, because sometimes there might be an undermining tactic, but that's ruled out here to undermine f6. We have rook c8, and now this position is really interesting. That g4 is justifiable, it seems, even more now with this next move. Guess what white plays here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. So another move which really is justified by the position. Okay, h4, just trying to, you know, open up this h file. h6. If queen takes b2 here, then this is far too dangerous. Like this, for example, bang, and rook d6, and this position where it's just going to be very, very advantageous for white in all the variations. Basically, this smashing of the king side. Look at all the black's pawns are isolated, so very, very dangerous position there. So h6, we have g5, and white seems to be content to close up, but there's an idea here after h5. Can you guess? What does Stockfish play in this position? 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, knight takes h5, ripping open the king side. Black dare not take this. Knight takes e5 was played. If g takes h5, then the key move is queen takes f7, it seems, and the king is getting mauled. That's desperate, I know, knight c6, but what else? in this position, after queen takes, if rook f8, then queen takes, and then g6. So black would have to give up material anyway, and it's getting smashed there. And if knight takes e5, then queen takes, and rook takes e5, and queen g6, and bishop d4. The dark squares are falling apart, or black's losing a rook, sometimes like this. So yeah, there's carnage, devastation, that sort of thing on g takes h5, as you can see. So knight takes e5 was played. Now this, I thought, was a really fascinating tactical moment, very instructive for the dark square attack potential. Guess what white plays here? It is a stunning tactical move again. So again, Stockfish is saying, you know, chess, it really just depends on the position. So this position, what does white play? A nice tactic indeed. So 500 points if you can find it. And the continuation, an extra 500 bonus points. The continuation is everything. Rook takes e5 is played. So bishop takes, and now, yeah, what's the meaning of this? Isn't this crazy? What has white just done? White's just lost material for nothing. No. Queen e3. It hits the bishop. It protects this bishop, and it encourages bishop takes c. There'll be a back throw on that diagonal. And black is just getting destroyed here on the dark squares, it seems. Black played bishop g7. So just to show, bishop takes, there's queen takes c3 check, and the knight and queen coordinate very well for a checkmate. But let's have a look. If bishop b8, then there's check, and that wins c8. That wouldn't be too clever either. If bishop c7, bishop d4 check, knight f6 check, this position with h5 is quite crushing. There's no real defense to white crashing through on the king side like this with a fawn pawn. And there's a fantasy variation, by the way. These checks just run out. If you look at these checks, even in this position, they're all running out because this rook's quite a useful defender. So here they run out, and that wins the queen. But I'm wondering about rook g1 now. Not having analysed this, I thought it would be winning the queen, but what about rook g1? What does white play here? Ah, yes. Maybe because of king h2, well, there's all sorts like rook h1, so maybe just taking, and here it looks as though bishop f8 is really super strong actually. The knight's covering g4. Yes, bit of improvisation there, sorry about that, but I think this is quite convincing to my naked eye. So that looks absolutely crushing. So there's lines which are really crushing. Anyway, so yeah, it's a really, really dangerous position. Let's just rewind that. So this is the line where that dark square play is exchanged for a fawn pawn, and it's just very, very tricky for black in this position to defend. Okay, and no, I just want to show you the mega exciting line though as well, which has been analysed in advance. So check. You might think, well, what about rook h1 check? I couldn't believe my eyes here. But white technically is winning this. White plays king g2, and the checks just run out. If check, the king goes to e4 in this particular position. And after check, king d5. There's apparently there's nothing going on here apart from black losing. Yeah, it's a fascinating position once that Vulcan grip around the king has been created. So yeah, this is a mega tactical game, I have to say. So bishop g7 was played in response to this stunning looking queen e3. And we have knight takes, king takes, check, and now h5 here. So the exchange down, but the threat of the pawn with h6 is really quite strong. Black gives up the exchange in a kind of desperation. Rook takes c5. If g takes h5, g6 punches the way through to the king. So for example, like this is pretty devastating, and it's going to be mating basically, like for example like that. And okay, so rook takes c5, giving the exchange back. Rook takes, queen b4, and we have c4 now. That rules out any queen g4. So these are the sort of backfires that would happen to us as mere mortals with these pawns being moved around the king. So at some point there's going to be a backfire. a3, is this a good attempt for counterplay? H takes. So Stockfish allows this very dangerous looking pawn, but it's just smashing through the black king here after g takes, king f8. If king takes f7, then check, and this is just ending in checkmate for the black king. So king takes f7 doesn't fare very well. And in this line, if king f8, then there's queen h8, checkmate. So king f8 was chosen, check, and now Stockfish just casually is about to casually, after rook c7 check, protecting that pawn, take this rook here. Maybe not that casually. It's calculated, it seems, that this promotion with check is mostly harmless. White is threatening f8 after all. We have king takes c7 and f8. So you might wonder, any options here for queening with check? It doesn't really do anything, it seems. This position, white's sort of better, a bit like the game actually. So white's significantly better. So in the game, king takes f8, and then this pawn promotes. And you might think, well, hold on, after all this, what on earth is this? Is this enough to win? The problem is here, this king has been driven away from this huge passed pawn. It's not really helping the fight against this passed pawn. This single extra passed pawn is really effectual here. And in fact, after queen g6, it was also adjudicated as a loss for black. The reason is, for example, queen f6, and checks are not very useful, and the pawn just marches through. These checks actually would just result in the king just travelling up the board, with g7 is going to be winning, really, without that much fuss. So that extra pawn in the end, in this queen and pawn endgame here, is actually pretty decisive as an advantage, because of queen f6. It's going to lift the blockade and crash through. So a really fascinating tactical game. I wonder if philosophically we can get stuff for our own over-the-board games as an over-the-board player. Well, as an ex-over-the-board player, well, I didn't play much over-the-board anyway. I mean, as an online player, not with the current coronavirus situation, as an online player, avid online player even more. Yeah, what can it teach us philosophically, this game? I think the key philosophy it teaches us quite a lot, Stockfish, is like trying to say to us, I'm going to play this outrageous move, and I don't care about your general rules. You can tear them to shreds. I don't care about them. So moves like g4, queen d1, rook a3, then that, knight takes h5 was nice. The stunning queen e3 was nice. There's a lot of nice, interesting, outrageous-looking moves at many points in this game, and yeah, it does create a kind of aesthetic impression. So something of a game example for attacking chess. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube, subscribe's welcome as well. And also you can challenge me for a game if you want. If you register via kingscrusher.tv alone, you'll get me saying, like, if you can register, I'll invite you for a game. So kingscrusher.tv or bit.ly/chessworld if you prefer. You can also join me on the Discord chat, maybe discuss future games you might want video annotated at kingscrusher.tv/discord. Okay, thanks very much.